Important notes about other tools. Hi, in this video we'll do a quick overview about some tools I didn't talk about in depth. These are tools I rarely use in my web design work, yet I feel you should know a little bit about them. The lasso tools. There are 3 in total and they're used to create selections. They're not particularly accurate as they require a steady hand and quite a zoomed-in view. This is for fast and broad selections. If I wanted to quickly select this area here, this is how I'd go about it. And this relies on the same Shift and Alt keys to add or subtract from your selection. Shift adds, Alt subtracts. The polygonal lasso is again built for speed, but its twist is that it only works in straight lines. Each click represents another anchor point. If you get it wrong, just press backspace on your keyboard. Depending on how fast you click, this may give you good results. Remember to always come back full circle to close it off and get your selection. The magnetic lasso requires only 1 click on the edge of the building and then you simply hover across it. Based on various wizardry, Photoshop will recognize that edge and give you a good selection. You could click several times, yet the program decides for itself how many anchor points you need. You also have a bunch of options in this top panel, through which you can fine-tune these settings until they give you a great result. Thing is, most people neglect this tool as it requires more effort. Compare it to the Quick Selection tool and you'll understand why the lassos don't get enough love. The Spot Healing Brush tool. This tool makes any blemish or minor imperfection magically disappear. It relies on the brush tool, so make sure you have a good size. You click on any problem area and it does its job amazingly. I'd actually call this a magic tool. By default, you may have this Sample All Layers option unchecked. This means you must work on your layer directly, which will permanently adjust those pixels. As you probably remember, that's not the recommended way of working. So what we will do is create a new empty layer. Now I'll check this option. Let me get a few more of these spots. It works like a charm. Let's see a before and after because that's easy to do because I can toggle the visibility of this layer. Good stuff. Now, let's move on to the Healing Brush tool. So we've lost the spot from the title, let's see what we can gain. First, if you try to click, it will tell you that you haven't defined a source point. That's because this tool requires you to point Photoshop in the right direction. You're saying, hey, I want you to match these specific pixels from this particular area. And like a genie, Photoshop does what it's told to do. I recommend you always create a new layer when working with these tools. Each correction should have its own layer and it's best to rename them. The Healing Brush also has an option whether you'd like to work directly on your image or sample on other layers. I suggest you use Current and Below. This means it will look for pixels on both your active layer and the ones underneath. If you choose all layers, you're going to get details from layers that are above it, which probably isn't what you want. So I'll hold down the Alt key and click on the clean area. Now I'll paint over the messy ones. It's important to notice you have 2 cursors on your canvas, which may be confusing. One is showing you where you're painting, while the other one is showing your source. It's vital you keep track of both because if you stray too far, you might end up with something like this. To prevent that from happening, I recommend you click several times. Try it out for a bit to see the best results, but clicking several times usually does a better job. It's also important to note that Photoshop tries its hardest to maintain all the details, shadows, highlights, and edges. The Clone Stamp tool. Although it asks you for a source exactly like the Healing Brush tool, it doesn't blend pixels. Instead, it just copies them. So that's the essential difference between the two. So if you're trying to fix a problem area, you need to have some clean pixels you can copy over. You might think this is an inferior tool, but it's great when you want to remove an object from a photo. That requires far too much time, and this is not the goal here, but let me tell you what this aligned option does. Let's see it checked. If I sample this spot on the left, and now I click on the right side, you'll see a new spot will have been copied. It doesn't look right, but that's not important. If I want another spot lower down, notice what happens. I'm not getting a red dot, because my second cursor is way down. It's being aligned with my primary cursor, if you will. So the aligned option matches the position of your cursor. As I paint downwards, the source moves in that direction as well. Now, let's uncheck it. I'll sample a red dot again, and I'll click several times. As you can see, we're getting dots constantly. Okay, let's continue. The Patch tool. Here's the idea. You create a selection around your problem area. Then you move it somewhere in good condition, say this right part of the image. Though it looks very different as you hover over it, once you let go, Photoshop does its magic, and we end up with a good result. Unfortunately, we have to work directly on our layer as there's no Sample All Layers option. Let's move on to some fantastic tools for retouching. The Sponge tool. This works directly on the layer, so we'll make a duplicate with Ctrl-J to illustrate the effect. Its hotkey is O, and you can use Shift-O to move between these three tools. It has two primary methods of working. It can add or remove colour, exactly like a sponge. Let's add colour to our tree line, our sky, and maybe to her top. I'll choose Saturate as my setting, and I'll use a fairly big brush with a low hardness. That's going to ensure a smooth, feathered transition. We don't want big blotches that might stand out. As you progress, you can toggle the visibility of this new layer and check out the differences. The other mode of working is Desaturate. Let's use that on the boat so you can see how that works. As you can see, it slowly takes away its colour in a natural way. The idea is to build up your result by clicking several times and going over an area. This works best with a tablet with the pressure option checked, but your mouse can do a good job as well. The flow setting decides how fast you apply this effect. Okay, let's move on to the Burn tool. Here I'll create a new layer and I'll use Shift F5 to fill it. From this pop-up, I'll choose 50% grey as my contents. This will help me work non-destructively. Now I can see nothing, but I'll change the blend mode to overlay from the layers panel. We'll talk about these blend modes later. Okay, now apparently there's nothing happening. It seems my layer has vanished, but this gives me the ability to perform various edits, and only they will show up on this layer. Let's start dodging, which implies I'll brighten certain areas. I'll focus on the water mostly, but I'll also touch up the trees a little bit. I'm trying to bring more detail into the image and make it pop. You can also focus a little bit on the girl and on her hair, maybe on her bikini as well. It's up to you. Just remember to disable your 50% grey layer constantly to see the differences. If you want more power on your dodge tool, you can increase the exposure. This spans from 0 to 100%, but you should stick to 30 to 40% at the maximum. I recommend you use your keys to adjust these values constantly. 1 means 10%, 4 means 40%, and so on. Quickly jump between values to get the best results. And again, slowly build up your effect with the help of a soft brush. You can also target specific points of an image by using this range drop-down. I'll speed things up because I don't want us to spend too much time on these various tools. For web design purposes, we'll rarely, if ever, use them. Dodging and burning are one of the best ways to improve an image. Let's focus on the Burn tool, which darkens targeted areas. Here I'd like to focus on the sky to see if burning can improve it. And I think it does an excellent job. We can also use it on the girl, specifically on her shoulder, to bring in more colour. This is a great way to make muscles pop. By accentuating the natural grooves in our body, you can get a much more impressive six-pack or muscle definition. Okay, let's wrap it up. Let's look at our result. This is our starting point, and this is where we're at. Now this takes time. Don't speed along as I did. Initially, you must experiment a lot, and I recommend you crank up your exposure so you can really see your impact. Then revert to the original image and start again with milder settings. This concludes our lecture about some of these interesting tools you might use occasionally in various projects. I'd like you to download these images and recreate my steps. Take your time with them and see what you can do. Armed with this knowledge, you can decide for yourself how you can improve an image. Good luck!